Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which this panel is taking place, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I'm Lucy Smith. I'm the host of Mornings on Triple J, but today I'm hanging out with you to bring you a special panel for Music New South Wales for sound advice to release or not to release. This is all about the best release strategy for your particular single or your record and how to go about that. We've got some pretty great names on board for this one as well. So joining me for this chat, we've got Vic Edirisinghe, who is the co-director of Astral People, and we've got Meg Williams, who is the director of the Inertia music label group. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
On behalf of Music New South Wales, I'd like to thank our partners, Create New South Wales, APRA MCOS and Doppler. So let's get into it, shall we? So let's start with, could you give us an overview of your organisations and what an average day would look like for you? So Vic, we'll start with you.
Sure. So I've, as you said, I'm the co-director of Astral People. So we're a Sydney-based company that have been around for about 9 years now. So there's a few facets to our business. The main two are artist management. So we represent artists such as Winston Surfshirt, Cosmos Midnight, Milan Ring, Arno Faraji, Stephen, GL, Basenji, and Joe Carey and many others. And then international touring as well. So we represent on the international touring side artists such as Stormzy, AJ Tracy, Dave, Kamal Williams, Yusuf Days, Little Sims, Palms Tracks, Object, John Talabot, and many others. So those are the two main arms, and we've also got a publishing JV with BMG, an events company doing events for the likes of the Sydney Opera House, curating stages for festivals such as Splendour in the Grass, Subsonic, Strawberry Fields, doing our own festivals such as Last Dance and Summer Dance series. And then recently, our most recent endeavour has been Astral People Recordings.
I'm the director of the Inertia Music Label Group. Inertia Music is one of Australia's biggest independent music companies. We've been around for about 20 years. A couple of years ago, we joined with PIAS, which is a global independent network. I run the label group side of it, so what that means is that any partnered labels or licenses with artists falls under my remit, and then we have the distribution side of the business where we do physical and digital distribution services for a number of labels here from Australia and international labels coming in.
So I would say that the main release that we've kind of worked on together has been this new Sydney artist, Stephen. And that's an interesting case because we manage him as Astral People, but we also have him on Astral People Recordings, our label with PS. And so that's been a campaign that we've literally just released last week, the final mixtape. And I guess with that particular mixtape, firstly, let's address the whole title of mixtape. You know, we were very traditionally, we always speak about singles, EPs, and albums. And the reason why Stephen wanted to release this as a mixtape, even though it's 12 tracks long, so it's a full body of work, and it would usually constitute an album. And by Spotify and Apple's definitions, which we found out during the campaign, it is an album still. I guess for him, he's a 19-year-old kid. A lot of these songs that he made were, between the ages of 16 to 18. And so for him, he's still trying to find his feet. And I guess the whole debut album concept can be quite daunting, especially if you don't know exactly what your sound is. So we thought we'll take the pressure off. We'll release it as a mixtape and therefore don't have the clout of being, under this debut album umbrella and work towards his official debut album when the time is right, probably in 2 or 3 releases time.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense because it's kind of like a collection, if you will, of what he's done so far.
Yeah, totally.
Do you think there is a situation where maybe you would look at an artist like Stephen, who is, young, up and coming, has released a few singles and go, don't put out the mixtape, just wait until the debut album?
I mean, I think you definitely have to be conscious of timing with everything that you do at every stage that you are in your career. But I think for Stephen, it was the timing he was in control of, or he still is in control of. So because he was such I think when we started working with you guys, he'd only just released Time.
Yep, yeah.
So it was like the first proper single kind of came out and there was all this hype around it and he was really in control about when he was dropping everything. So I think being conscious of timing is always really important, and knowing when to shift and when to hold back. I think definitely the last couple of months, we've also really reviewed like how we're releasing things in, response to everything around the world. So it's like you kind of have to be conscious of the time. So there's a couple of rules where we're like, don't release a single within 4 weeks of each other, because it takes 4 weeks for the algorithms to kind of kick over and a song to settle into playlists when it's settled in. So there's those little timing tricks that kind of we try and navigate. But in terms of how to release it and like the timing of it, or is it too soon to release an album? Is it too late to release an album? Like, I think that is really up to each artist to kind of work out how and why and what your expectation is of that release. And for Stephen, it was really, let's get it out in a way that is really exciting. And he's able to capture the excitement of his fan base in a way that it felt like it hit at the right time.
And when you talk about algorithms, are we meaning, streaming service algorithms, social media algorithms?
Streaming service. So if you put out a song, it kind of settles into all the new music playlists, and then it kind of goes from there into the personalized and all the algorithmic playlists. And it kind of takes around 3 weeks for the algorithm to kind of set in and it settle into people's personalized playlists, and then all of like the, programmed playlists after that. And if you have something that comes out too soon, it kind of just resets it, and that song the first song gets a little lost.
I guess this is a pretty broad question, but we are talking about, to release or not to release. How do you know when an artist is ready to release, whether it be a single or a record or a mixtape?
My whole thing, and this is just speaking from experience, the campaigns that have always launched the best are the ones where we've had all our ducks in a row.
Yeah.
So, perfect example would be a band that we manage, Winston Surfshirt. Now, when Tom and I, that's my business partner, signed Winston Surfshirt for management, it wasn't until 12 to 14 months, so a good year after we had signed him, that we had released the first single. And let me just state that he already had the album done, but the album just wasn't to the level that we knew that it could be, and especially those key singles like Be About You, which is a multi-platinum selling single now in Australia, just wasn't at the level that we thought it could be. So we spent a good year finessing everything. Now, for me, the word that I like to use, this is my buzzword, is holistic. So everything has to come with a holistic approach. So the press shots have to make sense with the artwork has to make sense with the music has to make sense with the social media channels, the videos, all that. It all has to have this uniform identity to it. And that takes a long time to really get right. Because the way that I look at it is that music is just one part of a project. The way that I look at it is like a project is almost like a brand. You're building a brand, and the music is really only one part. Now, if you take the music out of it and a fan was just going to your socials for the first time or your YouTube page for the first time, what do you want your band to stand for, or your artist name to stand for? Like, what do you want to represent without the music being there? And I think that's a really key thing. And as I said, to get that right takes a long time. And for me, I personally wouldn't want to release a project or start a new project until you felt like you had all those facets lined up and ready to go.
Yeah, Meg?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's not enough, value put on like the creative and like the imagery that goes around a release, because you have to get the recordings right. The songs have to be right, but the first thing that somebody sees from your artist is normally the social media pages or the art, like the album artwork. And even though it's all digital now and the album artwork's tiny, like that kind of needs to stand out and be relevant. So I think having everything lined up, like I kind of try and get all the videos in advance, but I feel like videos are always blowouts. But like getting everything like mapped out, so you know that when you're dropping everything, you have the capacity to be responsive, as well as you don't have to respond in stress mode. You can kind of be creative in that.
Exactly, and that's a really...
It gives a lot more freedom.
That's a really key point, that being able to respond. Now, the worst thing that you want is like to be in a position where suddenly you've released like your first or your second single and it's gone off, but you've got absolutely nothing in the tank to back it up. You've got no follow-up single to come beat. You've got no remix. You've got no video asset. You don't have anything else to kind of back it up. So ideally, and trust me when I say this, like, Meg and I would spend our lives trying to make sure this happens, but it doesn't always happen. Basically, having all your assets, all your everything ready to go before even that first single drops, to make sure that you're able to kind of be flexible with your timelines. If you need to react quickly to, a song not doing so well, and you need to get something into the market quickly, you've got that single ready to go. You can kind of pick and choose when you're going to drop these like special moments in the campaign, and you can only do that if you've got all your assets before a campaign.
Yeah. Let's talk about the campaign. So there are so many different facets to it, as you've just mentioned, what would a typical release plan have? And there are, so many different elements. You've got your timeline, you do have your assets, you do have your supporting tour and your live shows. When you're mapping it out, what does the structure of it kind of look like, the bare bones of it?
I feel like we always start, I guess like there's two things that we kind of develop like alongside. I feel like the timeline is something we always kind of ideally map out. But before we kind of start locking in everything, it's like, who is the audience? How are we going to speak to them directly and like effectively? And what are the tools that we're going to use to communicate with them so that this body of work lands to the biggest audience possible? And those tools are the artwork, the press shot, the timeline is a tool. Are you doing videos? Are you doing remixes? Like all of that kind of stuff is the I guess like the road to get into the most amount of fans.
And a big thing for me is like also setting out before a campaign. I remember we did this with Stephen as well. Is actually just sitting down and mapping out your goals.
Yeah.
Like what do you want from not just this project, but what do you want from your career as a musician or as an artist? And I think that to be able to formulate those goals first and then be able to bring the whole team into that into that vision is really important, because it's almost you set your goals and then you kind of work backwards from there. So if your goal is to play Laneway Festival, Splendor in the Grass, in a year's time, what are the goals that you need to get to that point? What needs to happen to be able to get to that point? You need some Triple J play. You probably need to be able to sell out venues of at least 400 to 500 capacity to get their sort of interest. You need to kind of tick off these boxes to be able to get to that goal. Now, someone's, an artist's goal might be, hey, I just want to do like a do-it-yourself sort of warehouse show. And then again, you just kind of reconfigure your timeline to suit the goals that you're after. Whenever as a management team that we put together a timeline for a new project, whether a new artist or a new album from that artist, those timelines are at least 18 months. This shit takes a lot of time. It doesn't happen like, very quickly. And I think you need to as I said, a perfect example, if your goal is to play like festivals in like a year or two time, you've got to put in months and months of work in that lead up process. So for me, I would say like anywhere between 12 to 18 months should be a timeline for like any given like full body of work.
Have you ever had artists get frustrated that that's the amount of time it takes, especially for those artists that maybe are a bit more spontaneous or do want to be a bit more flexible? When you come to them and you say, yeah, we're looking at 18 months, have you ever had anyone, without naming names, get frustrated about that?
Yeah, definitely. But I think that when you're setting the goals, if you're setting the right goals for that artist, then the 12 to 18 month development process might not be as relevant, or they might not care about the timeline because they just want to get it out. So the goals then feed into how you want to set things up appropriately. Like we talk so early for releases, but that's because we're also talking about like when the songs are starting to be recorded as well. So there is like, you look at the project holistically, but when you're mapping out those goals, some artists just want to get it out there and have the audience that they can do a surprise drop.
Yep.
So that's fine. And that's kind of the goal that you have, is just to release it as soon as possible.
Yeah, it's kind of like, feeding the goals within the timeline. And when the artist can say like, hey, these are the goals that as a team we agreed on.
Yeah.
And these are the steps that we honestly think that you need to take to be able to achieve those goals, then normally you can convert the artist. But yeah, I have had a few times where I've set like a timeline to a new artist. So there's one project in particular that I'm developing at the moment that I've sent a new timeline, and he was like, what, like 2022? Like, what are you talking about? I've got the album here. And I was like, no, but look, these are your goals. You're the one who set them.
Wow.
This is what I think you need to do to achieve them. He's like, okay, I get it.
Yeah. What do you think are some of the common pitfalls that managers, artists, labels, or publicists really should potentially avoid, maybe when it comes to approaching the media?
Yeah, I think one example is that everyone should be a little bit more sensitive to what's going on around in the world. And that's something that we've all kind of been going through. And I think when we all went into lockdown for coronavirus, we were working with an artist who was putting out a song called Panic. And we sit down and go, is this the right time to put out a song called Panic when everyone is in panic mode?
Wow.
And it was like a week to go. Everything was lined up, ready to go. We'd announced the announcement, like it was all there, but it was like, is this the right time? And when we sat down and thought about it and looked at the song and looked at what the message behind the song was, it was about how to deal with your anxiety. And the song was like talking, like the artist talking to herself out of like an anxious place. So it actually was a very therapeutic song to release. So we had to change all the messaging around it. It wasn't like, look, brand new, because we were announcing the project with it. It wasn't like, look, brand new project being announced with this song. It was, hey, here's a song and this is what I went through and hopefully this will help you at this time where it's weird. And even like around Black Lives Matter movement, we had to really pull back on stuff because it wasn't the right time to push music. So I think it's like, that is something that people have to be a bit sensitive to. And I think the role of musicians to talk to the audiences they're talking to and the people that they're talking with and with media outlets, I think you kind of really have to be aware of who and why and how you're talking to people, because there's a big responsibility in that. So for me, I think that's a big learning in the last couple of months. We've all tried to pick up on a bit more.
Yep.
Yeah. What about you? Like with approaching, I guess, media organisations and pushing a release, what do you think some of the pitfalls are with that?
I think also, like, you want people to buy into, as a new artist coming through, you want people to be able to buy into you as an artist and you as a person. And I think when it becomes so much, when you're approaching media or even your social media channels, and you can just tell it's not a very personal, it's not very, the personality of that artist isn't coming through so much. It's very much like almost like a manager has just like written this like copy and you've just like posted these like, you just sell. I think that's one big pitfall of artists when it comes to social media, is like not being able to communicate with like their own personality and allowing fans to come in a little bit. And I think on the media front, I think it's more so like, everything that Meg's talked about, but more in terms of just straight up like servicing media. I think there comes a point where it's like, you first want media to buy into this artist as a person and for their music before you're just barraging them with like, link after link after link after link, and that's just something that I would absolutely avoid. Absolutely avoid. Build your story first, and have a little, have some, have a bit of a rap sheet building of like things that you've achieved before kind of approaching media. Like I would, it's really hard to just keep going to like different like media sites and radio and whatnot, and just be like, hey, play my music, or here's my song. What do you think? I think you kind of need to build a bit of a story before you take that step with like media and radio.
Yeah, and it has to be a little, like you have to have that genuine approach in all of your music. Like it has to be like not, like you think about how many songs are put, I think like Spotify released a stat like last year or something, and it was like thousands and thousands and thousands of songs released every hour of every day.
Wow.
So it's like so much music is kind of being put out there. How are you going to get one person to listen to it? And if you can get one person to listen to it, why are you getting the second person to listen to it? And it is kind of just that simple, like genuine conversation with people around you, and then that slowly starts to build.
Yeah.
What do you think is the most common error people make on social media when it comes to putting out a release?
I think, to be honest, that whole selling mentality.
Yeah.
A lot of artists will come and just be like, and you see it on their socials and that's the thing as well. Social media doesn't come naturally to a lot of artists, and that's something that we have to understand as well. But unfortunately, in this day and age, the ones that cut through, you just have to look at it, like look at the facts. Like the ones that are cutting through at the moment, they've all got very good engagement with their fans. And I think social media as a tool should be used less about sell. And it should be most of the posts should be about you as a person, about what you do in your everyday life, what you do with your music, behind the scenes sort of stuff. And then very few posts should be about actually, here's the link to the music. Because what you're trying to do is get people to buy into this product first before they actually go and purchase the product. But they need to feel part of it. They need to feel like they belong, or they need to have some sort of ownership of that project. And you can't do that by just selling them something constantly. You want them to, you want to come across as a genuine person, as a genuine band, and allow fans to kind of connect with you on a bit more of a personal level and not so much just a, exchange level.
And let's talk money and funding. I guess when it comes to a release strategy, what are some potential errors that people can make when it does come to pushing a new release or putting it out there when it does come to funding?
I mean, there's a lot of grants available to artists who aren't ready for to sign a full record deal or a distribution deal, but how our deals are structured, on one, like we'll go from a distro to a full suite of profit share licenses, like kind of thing, where the royalty kind of tips in the artist's favour through to our favour, depending on how much money we're kind of putting into the project. And then I think it just comes down to, like, when we always talk with a new artist, it's kind of, we like to sit down with them and be like, what do you need to get this project to the point where we can turn it around? Like, how much money do you need? Like, the conversations can be as direct as that, because we want to put in a deal that will turn out the best product, but we don't want to put in a deal that's going to make the artist in the red for the next 20 years of their life. Like, I think it's really important to navigate what different income streams are available to you so that you can make money from your music. And I think it's really important that no artist goes unpaid. Like, every artist is paid. Everyone, like, can kind of make a living as quickly as possible from the art that they're doing and not have to, I don't know. The funding is a bit tricky because there's so many different sources, but from a label side, we look at the advance to cover, like, all the recording, all the creative assets, all the assets that you as an artist take when the deal subsides.
Yeah, it's a funny one, because obviously a lot of artists don't have the luxury of having a label or having that advance coming through to be able to help them with building assets. But for us on our end, like, we've signed artists that have been playing shows, that have, released music, and they've done that with next to no budget. And that's the great thing about the times that we're in now, is like, and that's what's probably the big difference that I can say in my career over the last 9 years on the management and label side of things, has been how flexible deals have gotten, and how many artists are coming through because of, like, the presence of their social media accounts, like we spoke about before, and the importance of that. You could have a strong social engagement with some fans, and you could be literally chucking up your music on, like, a TuneCore, or like, on a Cobalt AWOL, or some sort of distribution service, which is pretty easy to do and easy to kind of, like, facilitate by yourself, and still get your music on all the channels and still get it heard. And if you're lucky, maybe pay a little bit of money to, get someone to pitch the music to DSPs, so digital streaming platforms like Spotify and Apple for you. But it is an exciting time for, like, a young new artist to come through, because, the traditional route would be like, when I started, was very much like, you had to attract the attention of a label consistently. And that's something that, and there's definitely still place for labels in the world. And to be honest, if you want to go to that next level, more often than not, you do need that sort of extra support. And also just like an extra team, extra set of ears, extra hands on deck is so useful. But a lot of new artists that are coming through, you don't need a lot of money. You don't need a lot of funding. You can actually do a lot of these things. And that's coming from, like, real life examples of a lot of our clients now that have kind of taken that next level in their career. They actually started we discovered them just because they were just, like, popping things on SoundCloud and on different DSPs and making really, like, low budget video clips with their friends, which sometimes connect better than, like, these big high budget clips that people spend 20 plus grand on. So yeah, I think it's just more about, like, knowing who you are as an artist, knowing who your audience is, and then doing the best that you can to connect with them through other methods that are free to use, whether that's through your distribution service plus your social media and whatnot.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, because the funding conversation, I guess, is the least relevant when you're talking to label, because you can do it yourself. So if you go to a label, you do want to make sure that you're with a team that makes sense for you outside of just money. You want to be able to collaborate on it. So
How does the strategy change when it comes to a standalone single, when it comes to an EP, when it comes to an album? I guess looking at that format, how would you go about it?
Like, with a single, there's only so much that you can do with it, and it's really hard to convert media to be able to talk about just, like, one song out of nowhere. That's what I always find is really tricky, and something that I've learned from our publicists as well, very much so. They always want more to talk about. They want something bigger to talk about. But for the sake of this question, I would just say, with a single, for me, I would want if I'm just doing a one-off single, I would want a video to accompany it. I would want good digital assets, like things like little animations and that sort of stuff that can work as teasers and whatnot. I'd want, obviously, like strong holistic identity, like we spoke about before, with the press shots and the artwork. And then also I'd want, like, a backup asset as well. Now, that backup asset can be a remix of that song, something else that can tie everything back to that song, maybe a live version of that or another cover of that. Maybe you get another feature artist if it's like a hip hop or rap tune that could work. But yeah, it's you want to have, like, I think a really important thing with releasing a one-off single is just have something else that kind of ties everything back to that single as well. And then as I flow onto something like an EP or an album, then it's like, you'd want the whole package. You want at least, like, let's just say that we've got a 10-track album, you'd want at least, like, 2 or 3 of those songs if your goals are to get radio play or play, sell out shows and that sort of stuff, you'd want at least like 2 or 3 of those songs that can be, that can translate on radio well, translate across media well. You'd want 1 or 2 video clips that can help fans connect with the visual identity of the project a little bit more. You'd want maybe some remixes and whatnot as well, and you just want be able to translate that album or that concept into a live format as well. Because the biggest thing that I think one of the biggest areas that artists kind of fault these days, they put so much effort onto this big body of work or like a single, but if you can't back it up these days with a strong live show, it becomes redundant. It really does. Like these days, like the live show has become just as important as the releasing the music itself and the music itself. Because I remember back in the day, Meg, like, when I first started at Astral, people, like a lot of the producers I was working with would literally, like, their live show was like jumping up on and pressing a couple keys on their laptop, and they'd sell at Oxford Art Factory on like a $30 ticket, and it was crazy. I was like, this is great. But there was a big shift a few years ago, like maybe like about 3 or 4 years ago particularly, where like people these days, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's from me being in Sydney and not having the disposable income that a lot of other, maybe people in other cities might, but people these days don't want to part with their money so easily. And if you're not bringing it like on a live front, like the bigger and bigger we're finding that projects are getting, the more and more money that we're investing into these projects just in their live show. So it's like, and that's the thing, a lot of people would say, oh, Winston Surf Show or Cosmos Midnight, they're making, X amount of dollars, and that's heaps of money, but it's actually not, because like those crews are now up to like, Cosmos Midnight's just 2 people, that the touring party for that is like 9 to 10. So, and that's because like feature vocalists, sound techs, all that stuff, because you want to make that live experience as special as it can be. And yeah, so that would be, if you're going to do like an album campaign, the one thing that I would say, ahead of the videos and the art and all that sort of stuff, is actually just start thinking about having a very solid live show to be able to back it up and play those songs on the album.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing. And I think it's like, I think that is only going to become more and more important, and people are going to become more and more conscious of where they're spending their money in the live world. Like streaming is kind of like, it's there, you can make it, you can manipulate it in ways because it will constantly be there. But the live show, people are really going to, like, as we get into the next stage of like whatever the economy looks like, people are going to be really conscious of how they spend their money. And so as a band, you need to respect that they're spending their money on you, and you have to entertain to step out on stage and like make that show, because that's what they're going to remember as well. That's their like real moment.
Exactly. It's so funny, like so many conversations about like, it's when I talk to like, Mark Dodds from Handsome Tools, for example, so our business partner on the touring side, and we'll be like, oh, we've discovered this new act, how good is this music, just heard this on this playlist. And then he'd be like, oh yeah, saw her at Great Escape conference.
Needs another year.
It was shit. Yeah, exactly. It needs, give it in a couple more years. Like, we had those conversations so much, like where it's just like, if the live show's not good, it doesn't matter how much I love the music, we're not going to work it for a while until it's ready. And that's the big change, as I said, from when I first started, where people were literally coming with laptops and go and play, they get one song on Triple J, something they sell at Oxford Art Factory, and like, they just go up there and press play, and they're selling, they're selling these venues out. That just doesn't happen these days. Absolutely not.
The only other thing that I'd say on the release schedules is on the single. If you're putting out a standalone single, it has to be either a big radio track or a big streaming track.
Yep.
It has to fill one of those worlds, because otherwise it's just, why are you putting it out on its own if it's not going to be huge on radio, huge on streaming?
Yeah, and know, and when you're working towards an album, know when the right time is. Like, you have to understand that like not everyone's waiting for you to release your debut album. So always just remember, like, only hit those moments and pick your moments well when there's demand there. I find like a lot of artists these days are just like, I want to do a debut album, or I want to release something, but it's like, well, that's great and good on you, but like, who's going to listen to this thing? Like, who's going to listen to it? You need to build a story and like a framework and a brand behind that project through a number of singles or maybe an EP beforehand before you get to that stage. So yeah, I think there is definitely value in just picking the right moment and a bit of patience as well, which is, isn't the easiest thing to kind of instill into artists.
Yeah. You mentioned the radio single and the streaming single. I guess it's hard because we're talking about so many different genres or types of artists, but what are some of the characteristics you think constitute either of those?
Immediacy, I guess, is probably the easiest way to describe it. I think it has to be like, the music that I'm a personal fan of is quite emotional music, so I like to have an emotional reaction to it, and I know that's going to be the most immediate when you first hear it. But it has to be a song that someone can pick out in a very crowded market. So pick out from a bunch of songs on the radio, or pick out from a New Music Friday that has like 35 new songs on it. So you have to go for those like immediate looks, because if you're not going to get the press story off a standalone single, there's nothing driving people back to it. You really do have to make sure that it's standing out on its own with nothing around it.
Okay.
So for me, it's immediacy, shortness. I guess like the 3-minute 30 edit kind of is really key for both radio and streaming, because it is like it is quite a competitive market. I don't know what else makes a radio single.
Yeah, look, I think, to be honest as well, just having like a great hook, a great chorus is super important. I think having vocals that actually cut through. And so whether or not that's your pure vocals or whether or not that's engineered in a way, like mixed and mastered very, very, very well, so it can cut through on the airways. I remember back in the day, I don't do this anymore, but I kind of liked it. It was a pretty ghetto thing, but basically, like, you know, back in the day of like going into Triple J and we used to take our CDs. Before I used to do that, I used to go and play that CD in my car, but then I bought from Kmart like a really shitty like radio. I think it probably cost about $15, and I wanted the shittest one. The reason I wanted the shittest one because I was like, if my artist's vocals cut through on this little speaker, then it's going to cut through on radio. And that's a big thing. And so that comes down to like, you know, the mixing process especially, and the vocal mix, but also just having a vocalist that can kind of have those vocals that do kind of like translate a bit better. But, you know, these days as well, we live in a great, you know, age where, you know, just straight up dance and house singles now are kind of getting on the airwaves and getting popularity as well. So you don't really need that vocal side of things. But yeah, I think usual case, you know, it's, having a good chorus, good hook, and, you know, like Meg said as well, just that immediacy as well. It's a feel. And yeah, it's definitely a feel when it comes to singles.
Yeah, and I feel like there's so many exceptions to that rule. Like there's so many 10-minute songs that have been added to radio. Like there's so many exceptions. It's not like the hard. You don't need to have it to 3 minutes 30, but it does need to feel really like every single moment does count when you're putting it to radio and putting it on like those big streaming services.
You've mentioned the visual identity of a release a few times throughout this chat, whether that be on social media or the video. At what point in either the song-making process or post do you introduce the visual element? Like, are you asking your artists while they're putting together the song, what are you seeing? What's the vision?
So when I'm going to an artist with a new release, and we're about to talk about a new release, and maybe they've sent me some scrap demos so far of what they're thinking, the first thing I'd ask them to do is put together a mood board. Now, a mood board for me is like song references, visual references, video references of other artists that they like, other, you know, artworks that they like, other press shots that they like, and also like the sound that they're trying to go for. So they might put together in this mood board like a few albums. So honestly, I would encourage that you think about it from the very beginning. It's kind of it would be a weird thing for me to like, for an artist, I think, to create like this big body of work and then suddenly be like, well, okay, well, this is now going to be my image. I think the image has to come from the music for it to be really authentic and for that cohesion to happen. So I think it's definitely a conversation to be had, I believe, at the start of the campaign, literally when you're making the music, and kind of build and flesh out the ideas as the music comes together.
Yeah, I remember, like, I love it when an artist does a mood board. And I remember like the first meeting we had with Ali Bada before her last album came out, we had all like sat around and she's like, okay, so this is the album, this is what it is in my head, this is what it sounds like. And some of the songs recorded, not all the songs, most of the demos are in hand. And she's like, this is what I see it, hear it, this is my vision for it. And then she opened her laptop, turned around, she's like, and this is what it's going to look like. And I just nearly started crying. I was like, yes, it's so good, I get it. Because it also is really key in those moments when you have a clear vision for like of what you want your music to sound like and look like and be absorbed by and get people from, that the rest of the team are really activated by. So it's like if you're really strong in what your vision is, it might develop over time. It doesn't have to be the exact same thing as on your mood board, but it does help, I think, to communicate what you're doing.
Yeah. So we've talked about immediacy, we've talked about, you know, creating a moment, but I think it's quite clear that in this day and age, audience attention moves very quickly. So how do you get the most life out of a release?
So I think like the main things would be to have some supporting assets for that release. So if you've got, like we spoke about earlier, like with a single or with an album, make sure that you've got like, you know, plenty of assets to drop out on social media to tie in between song releases. Because, you know, sometimes the length between a couple of songs could be up to 2-3 months, you know, depending on how well that, you know, that song is going. And so you want to make sure that you can keep your fans engaged on, especially across socials and across media and, doing all that sort of stuff. I think also, having the right publicist working your release as well that can kind of like, know when to drop interviews and features at the right times and maybe do like a mixtape for like this side or do like a Spotify playlist for this side and kind of keeping your name out there as much as possible during the whole campaign. Because, some album campaigns can be like, at least 12 to 18 months. So you'd want to make sure that you've got a good, healthy amount of press and assets lined up. Also.
And activity, I feel like the live thing, like pick in when you're going, like when you're playing live and, in these times, like also when you're going live on like socials and stuff like that. So it's like the activity beyond the release, I think is just as important as planning up to it.
Yeah.
So for when we do our plannings, it's like, we're talking about this one release date a year in advance. We're actually also talking about the 3, 6, 12 months afterwards because they're just as important.
Yep.
And I think it's like, I think sync plays a really good role in like popping up songs from catalog that we've had a lot of success where all of a sudden something's just got a sync in the US or the UK or something and it's kind of jumped up. So I think an understanding that when something's out, there's always the opportunity for someone new to discover your music. So always being able to kind of, it sounds really cheesy, but when you are playing or you're supporting someone new, you're kind of like always talking about the fact that you've got recorded music out or like you can hear me or like follow me. Like you can work it into your shows in a way that makes it not selly but very genuine.
Yeah, keeping up the momentum.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a big thing. Like, the last thing you'd want to do is like, release this big single that you've invested a lot of money into and a lot of time into, and then just have nothing to kind of really back it up. And so it is really important to make sure that like not just the actual assets for the album, but like Meg was sort of talking about, those kind of things like, doing press, doing media stuff, playing, shows around those key singles and off the back of the album as well. And just like, these days as well, a very common thing is like, releasing an album and then afterwards, which hasn't been, I don't think it's been like a regular thing, but afterwards, people are then releasing like the video for like a song that people are connecting with on the album suddenly, and like kind of like almost bringing people back to the project. So that's, having that sort of flexibility because, sometimes you don't really know what a fan's going to connect with and what your audience is going to connect with. And sometimes it might be a song that you actually didn't think, fans would connect with. And it, and you want to be able to like, bring people back to that song. And that's another moment post album release that you can kind of like showcase that moment. And another avenue as well is just like, being able to like, look for the right features to feature on other people's artists. Because I think a great way of getting your music heard in different circles and different scenes is via featuring on other people's songs. So form, good relationships with like-minded artists, form good like connections, and and build from that. Because like it's definitely a good way of kind of getting your music heard from in different scenes outside of your own.
Yeah, I think like the like additional assets like a really good way to keep your like either the original song or just like a general release strategy going is alt versions and like remixes or live versions or piano versions, but having those different alt versions. And a really good example, like my favorite re-release was Moses Sumney's Make Out in My Car when he did the EP and like Sufjan did a reimagining, James Blake did something. Like it was 5 tracks, but it was all the same song and it all kind of fed into the one song that just has a whole other life and just started it again like months after the album came out. And it was a really beautiful like tribute to the songcraft that I quite liked. So having those alt versions that you can release long after, I think are really great. So when you're in the studio and you're recording the album, do a really stripped back version as well.
And make sure that when you're recording this album or recording this song, make sure you're getting like heaps of pictures and little videos and stuff like that. People want to buy into that, and it's always really annoying because like sometimes we release a song and then and then the artist doesn't have anything to really back it up. Oh no, I don't have any new content. But like you could have got so much content actually when you were making the song that could have been used during the campaign, and that's something that's really important. That I would say if you want like a cheap and easy way of like just getting like some assets. Literally like, pictures of your studio and little videos of like songs coming together, or maybe like a TikTok breakdown of like how you've kind of like broken down like, the instrumental of a song that you're making. That sort of stuff is super engaging, and that's what fans really are connecting with.
Yeah. So I'm hearing like planning, but be adaptable, use your platforms. So talking current day, touring is obviously such a huge part of the release schedule. You mentioned the importance of the live show, for instance. At the moment, do you think artists should be waiting until live venues reopen and touring is reinstated before releasing music?
That's the money question. That's the question that I definitely was asking a lot of labels when when COVID hit. I think, to be honest, like, I think the artists that were or are still the most active during this time, whether that's through like live streaming or whether that's just through like, releasing music. I think they're the ones that are actually going to benefit the most as soon as like, live touring can go back. I would say the tricky one for me at the moment though, and I still don't have the right or wrong answer because I've never done it before, is we're developing a new project and whether or not to release this new project during this time. Is it the right thing, or do we wait for live touring to be able to go back? And like we spoke about, touring's such a vital thing, part of getting your music heard, and not just getting your music heard, but getting your music heard over the next 18 months after it's released. That's the main part about touring. Is like you're constantly drawing fans back to your this album or single or whatever you're doing the tour for. And so it is touring is such a vital way of promoting the music. But having said that, if you are an artist that can make music quite quickly and is quite self-sufficient, Stephen's a perfect example, then, I don't see the harm in making that music and getting that music out right now. Still worldwide, I mean, Meg, you'd probably know more about this than I do, but it feels like there's still a shitload of releases,
Yeah, I feel like when things first started going into lockdown, we pushed everything back. Like, we pushed a lot of international releases back, and it was a couple of reasons why we couldn't get stock into the country, because a lot of it is made in Europe, and it was really hard, and it didn't make sense because that artist might have been more physical than digital seller. So we had to like go line by line of every single release in the 3 months come in and work out if it was the right time to release that artist. And there was a lot of we actually held strong on a lot of local releases, a lot of Australian artists. And I think the reason being, when we first went into lockdown, a lot of press and a lot of DSPs were like, Australian artists need us now, and we're going to make sure that they get our support. And so we didn't know when artists were going to tour again. I feel like now we can have a relative sense of when it's going to come, touring's going to come back for Australia, and international's a whole other thing.
Yep.
We can kind of work it out. But at the time, we were like, we don't know when they're going to be able to tour and earn an income, so we don't want to hold them back from earning money from releasing their music digitally. So for us, it was like a conversation with each artist at that time going, do you want to keep going? And a lot of them said yes, but this new project, it is a real conversation about, do we launch it now? Do we hold back? And I think where my head is at is that we're having a meeting now. I feel like where my head is at, because of the world that this artist kind of exists in. It's a whole new project, but it's like the artist exists in a couple of different projects, and because of where they exist, there's a lot of goodwill around it. And there's a lot of people waiting for this to launch that it makes sense to, but probably launch it in a way where the live show becomes like something that people get hungry for, and really tease that out, and not like hold back on even talking about live until it's ready. But at the same time, who knows? It is a real tricky thing, and I think at the time, the artist is to be able to say where their capacity is to turn it.
So to wrap up, to release or not to release, what is the one piece of advice maybe you could tell your younger self about release strategies?
I would say get all your ducks in a row before you, and set your timeline and set your goals well before you tackle the beast that is releasing an album, releasing music.
What about you, Meg?
Yeah, I think knowing why you want to release it now. Is it just something you want to get out there? Is it something you want to lead to Splendor in the Grass? Knowing why you want to do it. And I think from a really simple thing, making sure your metadata is sorted from day dot.
Meg loves
really
metadata.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this panel for sound advice on to release or not to release. Meg, Vic, thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
us.
Think with my body, I don't think with my head.